South Africa did not experience a formal, declared civil war like some countries, but it went through decades of intense internal conflict that many historians describe as a civil war-like struggle, especially between the apartheid state, liberation movements, rival political factions, and community militias. South Africa's conflict did not begin with guns. It began with laws. For centuries, colonial conquest, land dispossession, and racial hierarchy planted seeds of resentment. When apartheid became law in 1948, segregation was no longer just social, it became a weapon of state power. The ground was set for one of Africa's longest internal struggles. Apartheid divided South Africans by race, restricting movement, residence, education, and opportunity. Black South Africans became strangers in their own land. Peaceful resistance grew, but the state answered with repression. The conflict was no longer silent.
Organizations like the African National Congress, ANC, and Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, moved from petitions to mass protests. The people were waking up. The streets became classrooms of rebellion. South Africa was entering dangerous territory. In 1960, police opened fire on unarmed protesters in Sharpeville, killing 69. The world was shocked. Inside South Africa, something snapped. Peaceful protest began to give way to armed struggle. After Sharpeville, the ANC created its armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe. Sabotage replaced silence. Bombs targeted infrastructure, not civilians, but the message was clear: the war for South Africa had begun. In 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested. In 1964, he was sentenced to life in prison. The regime believed it had buried the rebellion. Instead, it created a global symbol of resistance. If you believe African history deserves to be told with truth, courage, and depth, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to the Chronicles of African Wars for untold stories of power, struggle, and survival. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to know this history, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, South Africa became a battlefield without front lines. Intelligence agencies hunted activists. Torture, disappearances, and secret executions became tools of control. The war had gone unseen, but not unfelt. When students protested against forced Afrikaans education, police responded with bullets. Hundreds were killed. A generation was radicalized overnight. Young people flooded into exile to join armed movements. The conflict entered a new phase. The ANC established training camps in Angola, Zambia, and beyond. South African forces launched assassinations and raid operations across borders. The internal conflict now spilled into regional warfare. As apartheid weakened, new tensions exploded. Rival political groups, especially ANC and Inkatha, clashed violently in townships. Neighbors turned against neighbors. This was no longer just resistance versus state, it was now a fragmented civil conflict. Secret police units carried out assassinations of activists. Bodies appeared in rivers, burned beyond recognition. Years later, truth would emerge that the government itself had fueled lawless violence. From the mid-1980s, South Africa lived under emergency rule. Soldiers patrolled streets. Detentions without trial became normal. The nation was at war with itself, officially and unofficially. Strikes, boycotts, and global sanctions crushed the economy. Mines shut down. The regime was bleeding financially. The battlefield had shifted from bullets to balance sheets. The South African conflict became part of the global Cold War. The apartheid government aligned with Western powers. Liberation movements received support from socialist states. South Africa became a proxy battlefield of world powers. By the late 1980s, both sides were exhausted. Secret talks began in prisons and foreign capitals. Prisoners were released quietly. The guns had not fallen silent, but hope had begun to breathe. After 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela was released. The world watched in disbelief. For millions, it felt like the war had ended. But for South Africa, the most dangerous period was still ahead. Instead of peace, violence exploded. Political assassinations, township massacres, and street battles became daily life. Many feared South Africa was sliding into full-scale civil war. The assassination of Chris Hani in 1993 almost plunged the nation into chaos. Armed groups prepared for final confrontation. The country stood one step away from open civil war. Against all odds, South Africans voted together in 1994. Long queues replaced gunfire. Nelson Mandela became president. A miracle had unfolded, not by victory in battle, but by victory in compromise. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission exposed hidden crimes. Some wounds healed. Others remained open. Economic inequality, land struggles, and social division survived the war. South Africa found peace, but not yet perfection. If you believe African history deserves to be told with truth, courage, and depth, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to the Chronicles of African Wars for untold stories of power, struggle, and survival. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to know this history, and I'll see you in the next chapter.